Always into the Night by Nicholas Vrekar. Paul's hands shook, nervous tremors. They came and they went, but not spontaneously. This wasn't just a condition tailored to his biology. The tremors came when he was scared, when he was angry, when he was excited. The adrenaline that pulsed through his system had no other place to go. It had always been like this for him, as long as he could remember. He could never stop his hands from shaking, not entirely. He had no cure for his disease, only a treatment for the condition, the symptoms, the results of anxiety given fruit. Flexing his fingers was his first thought, his go-to. Right now that was problematic. His left hand was free. His right hand was still tight around the grip of a .45 Colt revolver, the barrel still warm, the smoke from the single shot still lingering in the air, barely visible in the late darkness. He flexed the fingers on his left hand. The gun trembled in his right. This wouldn't do. He couldn't do anything about his shakes. Not now. Not here. He stuffed his gun back into the holster that hung under his coat. He was sure he had only 4 bullets left. Maybe 3. He didn't remember. The man that lay at his feet was already dead. Another bullet wasn't going to change anything. There was a sliver of light that cut across the alley. It was just enough light to see the man's face. He didn't recognize the man. Never saw him before in his life. He pulled the man's wallet from his pocket and ran. He came back to his motel room as fast as his feet could take him. He stuck to the back alleys, the shadows, just a shape in the darkness. Maybe someone would remember that he came by, but could they see his face? In the darkness, covered in shadow. Could they? He moved faster. The motel he was staying at was a dump, just a cheap room for a few nights. He couldn't stick around any one place. The longer he waited, the more likely the people looking for him would find them. They almost did. The man in the alley came close. He had loitered for too long. He'd have to leave. They would know. They would know that he was here. They were always looking for him, but not always finding. They would know about the man in the alley. They always knew when one of their own fell. There wasn't much to pack. He had a suitcase of clothes. He threw in the dirty with the clean. He promised he would sort through them later. He had a thick coat on a hanger in the closet. It was getting colder. It wasn't just winter. His path had been taking him north, and the farther north he went, the colder it was, into the forests, into the snow. He pulled out the briefcase he had hidden beneath the mattress, set it on top of the bed. He clicked the locks and opened it. In the dim light of the motel room, he inspected the stack of cash, the leather-bound journal, the flashlight, the knife, the manila folder beneath it all. He pulled out some money and the knife and closed the briefcase. Paul slipped the knife into his pocket. He picked up the briefcase and suitcase and left the motel room. His car was parked outside. It was a used 1993 Dodge Stratus. He had picked it up for cheap several states ago, in a used car lot. It had nearly 200,000 miles on it, and he had added another 50. The engine rattled sometimes after he shut off the ignition. The brakes felt loose. The trunk got stuck sometimes. The air conditioning didn't work. That didn't matter much now. He popped open the trunk and threw his briefcase and suitcase in. He slammed it shut. He didn't have time to wait. They were out there. They were looking for him. For all he knew, they were already aware of what he had done. He pulled open the driver's side door and slipped inside. The engine roared to life with the turn of a key. He hit his foot on the gas and the car lurched out of the parking lot. Driving out of the city meant leaving the lights behind, embracing the darkness. A long time ago, his parents would take him on road trips. They would leave early in the morning before the sunrise. It would still be dark. It wouldn't take long for him to fall asleep in the back seat. He remembered watching the lights of the city, so plentiful at the start, then fewer, then fewer, then fewer, until there wasn't much left. Not much left but the headlights of their beat-up van, a single point of light on miles of road. That was a lifetime ago, but it still crept in. Every time he left an old city for someplace new, it would be there, a shadow of a memory, clinging to the back of his mind. He drove until the lights of the city were dots in his rearview mirror, until the street lights gave way to miles of nothing, until all that was left to light the road were his high beams. He kept driving, always, into the night. He drove for hours into that pitch black. The city was far behind, replaced by long, sloping valleys of farmland. The farmland by hills dotted with trees. The hills replaced by an old forest, deep and dark. His adrenaline had held on for longer than he thought. The shakes he felt in the alley had stopped on their own. Give it enough time, they usually do. Paranoia was quick to take its place. Even in the lonely darkness, Paul could feel his fear feeding his paranoia. He had his eyes on the road ahead of him, his mind on the road behind him. Darkness stretched for miles in either direction. Every once in a while, he'd see another car on the road. He could feel their headlights reflected off his rearview mirror. Were they looking for him? They wouldn't know already. They wouldn't be able to find him again so soon. He glanced up at the mirror to look at the twin lights behind him, the car barely visible against their headlights. He clenched his fingers as they passed, one car after the other. Down the road they'd go, and then when they were gone, it was just him, the road, the darkness. He was tired. He could feel the weight of his eyelids threatening to pull themselves over. Another car passed by. He squinted at the lights in his rearview mirror, clenched his fists around the steering wheel as they shifted into the oncoming lane, watched as they drove off into the distance. There was a town a long while back. He couldn't stop there. It was too soon, too close to the city. They'd find him there. They'd find him for sure. Still, he had to find a place to stop. Hartsville was a small town in the middle of nowhere, unincorporated, a victim of the railroad expansion. It was founded by 3 brothers. They had money, sure, but that wasn't enough. They wanted the capacity to make more. America was expanding west at a rapid pace. The railroad was going to be their golden ticket. John Hart, he was the showman of the 3. He advertised. He got people excited about the prospect of starting a new life on the frontier. James Hart, he was the strategist of the 3. A lot of people were eager to join them, more than they expected. Someone would have to figure out how to move everyone from here to there. Jim Hart was the accountant. He was good with numbers. He was always good with numbers. It made sense that he'd keep track of the money. It was in the middle of the Civil War. The Central Pacific Railroad Company of California and Union Pacific were westbound. The Hart brothers, not wanting to be left behind, were ahead of them. James picked the location of their town based on the path of the railroad. Jim made sure they could afford the trip and make money off it in the process. John made sure everyone was still on board. The town of Hartsville was settled, constructed, built. It was a small but peaceful life, far from the war. It was there that they waited for the inevitable expansion, for the railroad, for a train that never came. James didn't understand why the railroad wasn't built as planned. It went miles outside their town. Jim fled the town with their money. John killed James and then himself. Some of the townsfolk stayed behind. Most didn't. Paul knew he was coming up to a small town before he saw it. The speed limit had changed. It only dropped when he was passing through another small town, another quiet place in the middle of nowhere. There were only a few street lights in Hartsville. It was all he needed to make his way down its short main street. He almost missed the motel in the darkness. When he hit his brakes, he could hear them squeal, like rats. He looked around and wondered if anyone knew he was there, if everyone did. A single streetlight flickered in the distance. A neon sign advertised drinks. He pulled his car into one of the motel's parking spaces. There was an office set at the end of a row of rooms. The lights in the office were on. As he walked up to the door, he could hear a television. Someone was awake. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. An old man in a worn gray sweater sat at the desk. His feet were propped up on the desk and he was leaning back. His eyes opened as Paul walked in. The old man lowered his feet. "Looking for a room for the night?" "Yeah. Actually, I was wondering if I could stick around for a week." "A week? Is that a problem?" "As long as you pay in advance." Paul dug his wallet out of his pocket. He paid the old man, and the old man dug up a key for an empty room. He looked over his room key as he walked. It was for room number 4. His car was parked closer to room 7, but he could fix that later. He was tired, ragged. He had been pushing himself from town to town, from city to city. He had to sleep. He opened the trunk of his car with a mild struggle. It gave on his third pull. He grabbed his suitcase and his briefcase and slammed the trunk shut. His hands were shaking by the time he got to room 4. He had methods to deal with it, but now they felt inconvenient. His suitcase in his left hand, his briefcase and the keys to the room in his right. He'd deal with it in a minute. He stabbed the key into the lock until it fit, twisted until the door unlocked, pulled the key out. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. It was a cheap room, but he got what he paid for. There was a bed, a bathroom past it, a closet on the right, a desk. He locked the door behind him and tossed his things aside. He'd unpack later. He took off his coat and collapsed onto his bed. Some nights he would have to wait for sleep. Some nights he would wait long. He would count the cracks in the ceiling, his breaths. Some nights he would imagine them looking for him right outside his room, waiting for him to fall asleep. This was no such night. He closed his eyes and he was instantly dreaming. He was running. He was always running. It felt like he could never stop. There was always darkness. There was darkness behind him and darkness ahead of him. He couldn't see beyond the darkness, but he knew he was being followed. They were watching him in the dark. Paul woke up in a cold sweat. There was daylight outside breaking through the windows. It was sometime in the morning, but he wasn't ready to step outside, not just yet. Not until he unpacked his things. He left his dirty clothes in the suitcase. He didn't think the town had a laundromat. There was some food in his suitcase, peanuts mostly, bottles of water. He was sure he'd make it through the week. He pulled his gun out of his holster and snapped out the cylinder. The gun had 6 bullets loaded when he found it. Now there were 4 bullets intact. 2 spent casings were still in their chambers. He pushed the cylinder back in place and holstered the gun. There wasn't much in the town. There were a few gray one-floor houses, old and in disrepair, A gas station, a diner, the motel, a bar at the end, the last business before the open road. Paul made his way to the diner. It looked like every house in that town except this one had a sign that said breakfast. There was another sign that said also lunch. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. Susie ran the only diner inside Hartsville. She had wanted to move out. She had talked about moving out for so long, argued with her mother. She had lived in Hartsville her entire life, commuting miles away to go to school. Tried to move on. The city frightened her. There was just so much. She stood behind the counter. She was pouring Ned another cup of coffee. She was ready to cut him off for the morning. When Paul walked in, she glanced up and said, "Go ahead, take a seat. I'll be right with you with the menu." The inside of breakfast and also lunch smelled glorious. Paul wasn't sure when he last ate a meal, something that wasn't peanuts or individually wrapped beef jerky. It was a cacophony of grease and syrup, bacon and eggs. His stomach rumbled as he sat down at the corner window. Susie stopped by with a menu in an empty ceramic cup. "A coffee for you, hun?" He looked from the mug to her. "Oh, yeah, that would be good." She left and came back with the coffee pot. He watched and waited as she filled the cup. "There you go. Thanks. Let me know when you're ready to order breakfast or lunch." It didn't take him long. He asked for scrambled eggs, bacon, but not too crispy, toast, butter. She smiled as she took his menu. That smile was gone as she walked away. She knew her business wouldn't exist if it wasn't for people driving through. It didn't make her happy serving people that made it in the city, despite the crowds. That didn't feel stuck in a place like this. Paul ate his breakfast slowly, sipped at his coffee until it wasn't so hot. Then he drank it down, asked for a refill. He didn't want to eat too quickly. From the corner seat, he could watch everyone in the diner. The woman that served him breakfast. Did she know what he had done? The man at the counter. The man in the red jacket glanced at him. Once, maybe twice. Did he know? And how much? It felt like the man in the red jacket was watching him as he ate. As he walked out of the diner, he looked over his shoulder before he stepped out, his hand against the door. The man in the red jacket had his back to the door. He wasn't looking. It was still mid-afternoon when he stepped out of the diner. He stood in the middle of the road, not a single car, not a single person in sight. The road north probably went on for miles. He could leave now if he wanted. He had his motel room for the next week, but he could leave. The gas station caught his eye. He should probably gas up first. If they found him, he'd have to leave town in a hurry. The last thing he needed was to be on the run, in the middle of nowhere, running on empty. He could hitchhike if a car ever passed by, a car not being driven by one of them. He topped off his tank and reparked his car in front of room number 4. He shut off the ignition and stepped out of his car. There was only one other vehicle parked outside the motel. It was an old pickup truck, its sides spotted with rust. It was at the end of the row. The man in the red jacket stood outside the last room, digging through his pockets. He checked his left pocket and then his right and then his left again. Paul's hands shook. He could feel the twitch in his fingers, the weight of the gun in his holster. Finally, the man in the red jacket found the key to his room. He unlocked his door and pushed it open. Before he stepped inside, he looked over and waved. Paul waved back. The man in the red jacket disappeared into his room. His hands were still shaking by the time he got inside his motel room. The door was closed. The lock was set. He checked it again. He sat down on the floor beside his bed and unholstered his gun. He pushed out its cylinder, pushed it back in with a click. He pointed at the door. It didn't take long for the shakes to stop, for the wariness to take its place. He was always tired. He set the gun down and waited, watched the door. He could hear the ticking of a clock. It was on a nightstand on the other side of the bed. He watched the door, waited. He looked to his gun, still in reach. He could grab it at any moment if he had to. His fingers twitched, thinking about it. The gun resting on the bed, the door. He reached for the gun and picked it up, felt the weight in his hand, pointed it at the door. Nothing happened. Nobody walked in. Nobody even knocked. Outside it was quiet. Daylight filtered in through the closed curtains. Inside there was the noise of the air conditioning, a steady rattle from the vents. Sometimes the noise would be everything he heard. It would encompass all his thoughts. The rattling of the air condition, the door, the gun. He closed his eyes. He opened his eyes. It was dark. Paul's heart raced as he looked around. He grabbed for his gun, but it wasn't there, just bedsheet. He tried to stand and hit his head against the nightstand. A lamp shook, but it didn't fall. He caught his breath, reached up, and turned on the light. He had to get out of this room. Paul found and holstered the gun and pulled at his coat, tugging it over the revolver. He smoothed out his hair and stood up, slowly this time, still nursing the knock against his head. The nightstand looked like it was doing just fine. He stepped out of his room to an empty street. The diner was closed. The lights were off downstairs. The lights were on upstairs. Susie had retired for the night. The bar was open. It was farther down, away from both the motel and the diner. It looked like a trailer had been converted into a bar, a mobile home that set down its roots at the end of the small town. A neon sign on the outside buzzed with life. Drinks, it said. The air on the inside was musty and stagnant, a thin layer of cigar smoke that crept up toward a single ceiling fan. A long counter extended across most of the bar. There were a few tables against the closed windows. The walls were covered with old license plates, motorcycle parts. A dartboard in the corner, its darts long gone. There was country music playing on old speakers. The guitar was there, but the vocals blurred together. Paul walked up to the bar and sat down. There was an old man behind the bar pouring out a drink. He handed it to the man in the red jacket. Was the man in the red jacket looking at Paul? The man took his glass and carefully sipped. The old man said, "What'll you be having?" "What? Oh, yeah, beer. Whatever's on tap." Paul looked back. The man in the red jacket had stepped away from the bar and found a seat at the table, facing away. It was a sloppy pour, but Paul paid for the drink just the same, with tip. As the night went on, he had a second beer, and then a third. He paid for those as he got them. The old man wasn't keen on starting a tab on cash alone. It was on his third drink that the man in the red jacket moved, stepped up from his chair. The man walked over to the bar, set down his empty glass, thanked the bartender, turned away, was walking past him, and Paul saw it for just a quick moment, a wink. The man in the red jacket walked past, pushed open the door, and stepped out of the bar. What did that mean? Had they found him here? Why was he waiting? What was he waiting for? Paul finished off his beer and set the glass down. His hands shook as he did. He could feel the weight of the gun in the holster. It was cold in the bar, but he could feel the sweat beating up on his forehead. Outside, a gust of wind blew in, colder than he expected it to be. He clung onto his coat, pulling it tighter as he looked around for the man in the red jacket. There were only a few street lights in Hartsville. Susie had petitioned the county to approve a budget to install more. The county wasn't interested in unincorporated towns deep in the woods. Paul couldn't find the man in the red jacket. The man had just stepped out, just left the bar, and he was gone. That was okay. That was fine. He'd just go back to the motel and figure things out there. He pulled his collar up and walked quickly back to the motel, back to his room. His fingers were frigid by the time he got back to his room. He searched his pockets for his keys. His hands were shaking still. They did that sometimes. It was his nerves, or it was the cold. He couldn't tell. He pulled out his keys and they slipped through his fingers and fell onto the doormat. He reached down, picked them up. As he stood back up, he saw movement in the corner of his eye. The man in the red jacket was pacing, just out of sight, on the other side of his pickup truck. There was a cigarette in his hand, a phone in his other. Stepped back behind the pickup truck. Paul walked slowly along the row of motel rooms. He pulled back his coat with his left hand and reached in with his right, drawing out his gun. He pulled back on the hammer and rested his finger against the trigger. He stepped around the back of the pickup truck. It took a moment for the man in the red jacket to register the gun. His eyes went wide. The cigarette fell from his lips to the asphalt. The phone dropped next. Paul shouted, "Get on your knees." "I don't want any trouble." "On your knees." The man lowered himself to his knees, his legs shaking, his left hand reaching out to his truck to steady himself. Paul said, "Are you one of Patterson's men? Did he send you? Does he know I'm here?" The man in the red jacket opened his mouth long enough to catch a bullet. The gunshot rang out. The bullet tore through the man's head. Red sprayed back, coating the rusted old pickup truck. Smoke curled up from the barrel. Paul looked down the street, to the diner, to the bar, to the motel office. Nobody was moving. Nobody was doing anything. He holstered the gun and ran for his room, fumbling his keys out of his pocket as he did. He unlocked the door and left it open, left the key in the lock. He wouldn't need to worry about either of them again. He tossed his clothes into his suitcase. He opened his briefcase, withdrew some cash, closed the briefcase back up. He ran them both to his car and tossed them into the trunk. As he drove away, he glanced at his rearview mirror. It didn't take long before Hartsville disappeared behind him. The lights from the second floor of the diner, the motel office, the neon light that buzzed outside the bar promising drinks. All of it blended into a single light in his mirror. Soon enough it was gone. Paul drove on through the night, into the darkness. There were his headlights, and beyond them a stretch of road that disappeared into the dark. The forest lined on either side, branches overhung above. Every so often a car passed by, its headlights piercing against the dark. The farther north he drove, the fewer cars there were. His adrenaline had kept him going for miles. He was barely aware of the miles that went by, the cars that passed. All he saw was his headlights in the road as he gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. White as the snow that fell outside. He drove for hours into the night, already deep in the forest. His headlights were bright on the road, but there were limits to their illumination. In the distance there was nothing. Beyond the tree line there was nothing. Darkness. Void. The adrenaline he had when he had left the motel was long gone. There was a burst of energy here and there. He had something that would help in the trunk of his car, in his suitcase. Maybe he could just pull over, open up his suitcase. Maybe if he ate something. Maybe if he drank something. He looked at the road behind him in his rearview mirror. There was nothing. It wouldn't take long for someone to find the body, even in a town like that. He couldn't stop, not yet. The road curved as it crept uphill. He didn't know if he was climbing a mountain or crossing over it. He knew he was tired. He had to stop somewhere. He hadn't had a decent night of sleep in so long. He didn't remember how long it had been. His eyelids drooped heavy over his eyes. He shook it off. Any minute now he'd pass by a rest stop, an exit. Mile markers drifted into view and disappeared into the darkness behind him. There were signs for exits to brightly lit gas stations with far too many people. He couldn't stop there. He kept going. He was tired, but the thought of all those people made his hands shake. He'd have to keep going. There was a sign for Holton Lake. It wasn't far. Just a few more miles down the road. If only his eyelids weren't so heavy. He could just close his eyes. For a second. It would be okay. He closed his eyes. Paul opened his eyes with a gasp. It was dark inside the car, but on the outside he could see his headlights. They lit up a field of snow in a bright white. He couldn't see the road past the cracks in the windshield, only snow. His right arm felt trapped against his side, his seatbelt tighter than usual. There was a tree branch that had punctured through the windshield, stabbed through the passenger's seat. Snow had collected inside the back of his car. He fumbled for the seatbelt clasp, his fingers frigid and cold. He found it, pressed it, and the seatbelt flung back. He shut off the ignition and the headlights disappeared. For a moment everything was dark. He tapped the dome light and the inside of the car was lit up. He reached into his coat and pulled out his gun. He pushed out the cylinder. There were 3 bullets, 3 shell casings. He pushed the cylinder back. He holstered the revolver, slipped his keys back into his pocket. The passenger seat was destroyed and the glove box with it. Somewhere inside of it there was a flashlight. There was no getting at the flashlight now. He'd have to leave, into the dark. He pushed open the driver's side door and stepped out into the snow. Behind him he saw the tracks he had made when his car had slipped off the road. Tire tracks that cut into the snowbank. The road was only a few feet away. He hoped that Holton Lake wouldn't be that far either. He walked around to the trunk of his car, unlocked it. He pulled at it, but it wouldn't open, no matter how much he pried. He'd have to come back. In the summer, Holton Lake was a tourist trap of the Great North. People came to the town in droves, some for the weather, some for the fishing, some for the quiet contemplation that came with a small town. Even in its busiest tourist season, it was a space that offered silence, especially in comparison to the big cities. There was a series of lakes that began just west of Holton Lake and crossed north, all of them interconnected. The largest and closest was the town's namesake. The town was little more than a short strip of shops and a hotel. Holton Lake was the center of attention. Today, the main street was the tourist trap. A long time ago, it was just a few stores, a bait shop, a restaurant that specialized in pancakes. Now it had grown into a main street that went on for several blocks. A library bookended on one side and a bank on the other. There was a parking lot along its main street. The parking that was always full during the summer. Cars would drive by, almost continuously, circling down and around, hoping to find that one spot as soon as it emptied, and then it would be full again. Wintertime saw the tourists dry up at Holton Lake. There were still people willing to make the trek, the diehards, Holton Lake enthusiasts through and through. But not everyone was willing to come out to a small town in the north, in the snow, to the ice. The deeper into winter it got, the colder it was. Main Street saw most of its shop closed as soon as the sun went down, if they were even open during the winter. The gas station stayed open. The motel, themed around fishing, stayed open. The diner, just inside the edge of town, stayed open. For the longest time, Paul stumbled in the dark, thinking about the briefcase stuck in the trunk. He'd freeze to death and they'd find it. He shoveled his feet along, from asphalt to dirt, from dirt to snow, from snow to asphalt, guided into the night by starlight. He walked until his legs were ragged. It was cold, too cold. He could feel the cold embed itself in the wrinkles of his cheeks, the hairs in his nostrils, the thin membrane of his eyes. He pulled his coat up over his face in a vain attempt to push out the cold. It only left his fingers defenseless to the frigid winds. His heart nearly leapt when he saw the light in the distance. It was faint at first, just a single light. It was a spotlight shining on a wide sign. It was set in a clearing to the side of the road. It said, "Welcome to Holton Lake." Beyond the sign there was a small town embraced by darkness. Paul was hoping to find a motel, a gas station with a bathroom and heating. It didn't matter. He'd stop anywhere that had heat. Even the Bates Motel if it came to it. As he walked past the sign, the road turned uphill. It was just for a moment, but it felt like the longest moment in his life. He cursed himself. He cursed the briefcase. He cursed the wind. It was at the top of the hill, looking down at the town of Holton Lake in the valley below, that he saw the diner. It wasn't the first building. That honor belonged to an old shack, but it was lit up in the middle of the snow-covered town like a Christmas tree. Multicolored lights in green and red lined the outside of the building. A brilliant neon sign flashed in bright red, Lakeside Diner. He walked down to it. When Paul pushed open the door to the diner, he barely felt his fingers. He flexed his fingers and hoped for feeling. There was warmth in this place, even in the doorway. He stepped inside. The Lakeside Diner was an old place, built in the 70s when Holton Lake was in its prime. Its decor hadn't changed much since then. It had a rustic theme that came across as charming to tourists, cliché to locals. That didn't stop the locals from coming over to the Lakeside Diner. Where else were they going to get a cup of coffee in the dead of winter? The inside of the Lakeside Diner was bigger than Paul was expecting. There were booths that lined up along the wall, set against wide windows facing darkness. Tables were positioned in diagonal rows across the center. There was a counter set in the back with old foam stools lined alongside it. Past the counter, Paul could see the kitchen in the back, but just barely. A waitress in an oversized sweater was leaning against the counter. A man in an old brown jacket sat across from her, cradling a cup of coffee. The waitress looked up as he walked in and called out, "Make sure the door clicks." Paul asked, "What?" The man in the brown jacket turned. Paul could see the sheriff's badge pinned onto his jacket. The door doesn't close easy. Just give it a nudge until it clicks." He turned back and pushed against the door. It clicked in place. The waitress said, "Thanks. Go on, take a seat, anywhere you like." Paul tried to smile, struggling against frozen cheeks. He nodded just in case. The waitress turned back to the sheriff. The sheriff turned back to his cup of coffee. There weren't that many people in the diner. In the corner he could see a couple, a blonde woman in a large coat sitting opposite a man in a green jacket. On a side table there was a man in a black suit slowly taking a pie apart. A woman in boots, jeans, and a hefty coat sat at a distant booth. She was looking at the darkness out the window. Paul picked a table farther away from the entrance, away from the front door and the cold air it would let in. As he sat down, he felt his bones settle. He had been driving for so long. He could just pass out right then and there, in the middle of the diner. The waitress came around and pulled him out of that fantasy. "Could I get you started with something? Maybe some coffee?" "That would be nice." "Be right back with it." He took a deep breath and tried to relax. Outside he could hear the wind blowing, harsher now. Inside he was okay, at least for the moment. Paul looked around as he waited. The sheriff stared at his coffee. The man in the suit finished his pie. The woman in boots watched out the window. The man in the green jacket glanced at him. Did he know that man? The man in the green jacket had already turned away. He could feel the weight of the revolver in its holster. He had 3 bullets left. Or 4. He didn't remember. His hands shook.